The signal came from a ship that was not supposed to be there. Velkoreth heard it first as a whisper in his earpiece, the kind of low-frequency hum that made the stone in his palm grow warm. He had carried the stone for 94 cycles, a fragment of the Torvani cliffs where he had been born, and it had never warmed before. That was the wrong detail. A stone does not react to radio waves. He was standing in the observation gallery of Council Station, a narrow room with 3 transparent walls and a floor that felt like breathing ice. 12 junior officers from 7 species hunched over their stations, their breath fogging the cold glass. The station hung between the twin stars of the Kethari belt, and the light that came through those walls was never steady. It pulsed. It made shadows move even when nothing moved. The number was 12,000 years. That was the first thing Velkoreth would remember later when he tried to explain why the chamber went quiet. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council had governed 46 species across known space. For 12,000 years, delegates had raised voices, struck tables, passed resolutions, filed objections. For 12,000 years, no one had ever seen the chamber go completely silent, until the signal came. It was not a distress call. It was not a threat. It was a registry ping, the kind of automatic identification broadcast that every vessel in Council space was required to emit. Except this one carried a classification code that did not exist in any database, and the mass reading attached to it was impossible. "Repeat that," Velkoreth said. He did not raise his voice. He had learned over 287 years that the most important things were heard better when spoken softly. Lieutenant Kurasal looked up from her station. She was Kavani, 42 years old by her species count, the youngest intelligence officer in the gallery. Her large, dark eyes caught the twin star light and held it. 18.4 million metric tons, she said. The registry lists 312 human vessels. None exceed 2 million. Velkoreth gripped the stone tighter. 3 hours later, the infrastructure subcommittee was still debating paperwork. The chamber held 4,000 delegates from 46 species, and the air smelled of ozone and old incense, the same smell Velkoreth had known since his first cycle of service. The debate was about transit permits. The debate was always about transit permits. Crew Commander Zthrek stood at the railing of the Vorkai delegation's tier, his scaled arms folded across his ceremonial plate. He had led 9 campaigns and taken 6 worlds, and his knuckles were white under his scales even when he was not gripping anything. His voice carried the certainty of men who had never been wrong. "Interdiction," Zthrek said. "Immediate. The vote is 341 to 19. The fleet deploys in 72 hours. No one argued. The Council had a doctrine of measured response, and measured response in this case meant 43 capital ships, 120 support vessels, and 890,000 crew moving to blockade a single unregistered vessel. Velkoreth watched the vote tally appear on the central display. He did not vote. The Torvani did not vote on military matters. They watched and they remembered and they carried stones. The part that still keeps me up at night, that comes later. 6 days earlier, the diplomatic waiting room on Deck 7 had been empty except for 1 man and a teapot. Admiral Dren Voss sat at the small table with his back to the door, wearing a leather flight jacket that had been scuffed at the elbows since his first command. He was 61 years old, 34 years in the United Earth Navy, and he had not spoken in the 20 minutes since he had arrived. He ran his thumb over the chip on the handle of a ceramic teapot manufactured on Earth 12 years ago. The chip was small, no larger than a fingernail, but he found it every time without looking. A steward entered carrying hot water. Voss did not look up. "Admiral," the steward said, "the Council has confirmed your request for a private hearing in 14 minutes. "Thank you," Voss said. He poured the water he did not drink. The waiting room smelled of recycled air and the mineral bite of ion-filtered light. Vel-Korath observed from the adjacent observation port, separated by a transparent wall. He had been assigned to monitor the human delegation's arrival, a routine duty that had seemed routine until he saw the teapot. Diplomats did not bring their own teapots to Council Station. They used the station's dispensers. They drank what was provided. Voss lifted the pot and held it in both hands, the way a man holds something he has carried through worse places than this. Vel-Korath made a note. He did not know why he made the note. The stone in his palm was cool again. The 14 minutes expired. Voss stood. He left the teapot on the table. He walked through the door into the main chamber, and Vel-Korath followed at a distance that protocol demanded and curiosity shortened. The chamber was full. 4,000 delegates in their tiers, 46 species represented, the great pale stone and transparent crystal of council architecture glowing with the light of twin stars. Zithrek was already at his railing, his ceremonial rank clasps clicking as he shifted his weight. Voss stopped at the center of the floor. He did not look at Zithrek. He looked at the empty space where the central display would normally show the speaker's credentials. "I admit to building something," Voss said. His voice was calm, the voice of a man who had already made every decision he needed to make. "I am required by Council Charter to provide 14 minutes warning before its arrival. You have 14 minutes. Zithrek's upper lip curled. 14 minutes for what? "For you to decide," Voss said, "whether you want to be sitting down when it gets here." The chamber did not go quiet. Not yet. The chamber laughed the way chambers laugh when a small species makes a large claim. Delegates murmured. Translators buzzed. Someone dropped a stylus and it rang against the stone floor like a small bell. Vel-Korath did not laugh. He was watching Voss's hands. They were still. The man who had fidgeted with a teapot for 20 minutes now stood with his hands at his sides, and they did not move. Kurasal found him in the gallery 11 minutes later. Her eyes were wider than he had ever seen them. "Sir," she said, "the signature, I ran it 3 times. And the hull is warm, 312 degrees, body temperature." She paused. "Nothing stays warm in the void unless something is keeping it that way." Vel-Korath looked through the transparent wall at the stars between the Cathari belt. The interdiction fleet was already forming, 43 capital ships in a defensive arc, their running lights blinking in patterns that meant readiness. 120 support vessels drifted behind them like fish following sharks. "How long?" Vel-Korath asked. 3 minutes, Kurasal said. "Maybe 4. The stone in his palm grew warm again. Space folded. That was the only word for it. Not a jump, not a warp. The stars in the forward quadrant seemed to bend, the way fabric bends when you pinch it, and then the fabric opened and something came through. The hull was dark. Not black dark, the way a hole is dark, the way absence is dark. It absorbed the twin star light rather than reflecting it. 12 kilometers long, 18.4 million tons, and it moved without engines, without exhaust, without any signature that Kurasal's instruments could name. But it was warm. Vel-Korath could see the heat shimmer on the hull, a faint distortion in the starlight that should not exist in vacuum. 312 degrees, body temperature. A ship that had been kept alive in the void, waiting, breathing, held at the temperature of living skin. The fleet held position, 43 capital ships, 890,000 crew. They did not advance. They did not fire. They simply held the way a man holds his breath when he sees something he cannot name. Zithrek's hands were on the railing. His knuckles were white. Voss had not moved. He stood at the center of the chamber floor, his leather jacket catching the light from the display screens, and he looked up at the image of his ship, the way a man looks at something he has known for longer than he has known most people. "The forward array," Kurasal whispered. Her voice was not steady. "It's opening." On the dark hull a section began to separate. Not a weapon exactly, not a cannon. something that looked like a lens or an eye or a mouth, 4 kilometers wide. It pointed not at the fleet, not at Council Station. It pointed at empty space, at a patch of darkness where a star sat 14 light-years away, too distant to see with the naked eye, too ordinary to have ever been named in any council record. The beam did not flash. It did not roar. It simply was, a column of light that made the transparent walls of the gallery turn white, then blue, then something that had no color in the Torvani vocabulary. Kurasal's instrument screamed. She did not look at them. She was looking at the beam, and it was not stopping. "How long?" Velkoreth asked. She did not answer. She was counting. The fleet commander was counting too. Velkoreth could see him on the tactical display, a Vorkai named Theskar, 34 years of service, his mouth open, his hand raised to give an order that would not come. The chamber was silent. For the first time in 12,000 years, 4,000 delegates from 46 species made no sound, no translation, no objection. The only noise was the hum of the air recyclers, and the faint, distant song that Petty Officer Sam Okonkwo was humming in the engineering bay of the escort frigate Borealis, a song his grandmother had taught him, a song about earth honey and summer rain, while he opened a tin and took a spoonful and watched the beam on his monitor and did not blink. The beam continued. It continued for 47 seconds. And then it stopped. The star that had sat 14 light-years away, the unremarkable star that no council record had named, shifted in its spectrum. Not destroyed, not dimmed, changed. The light that reached Council Station 14 years from now would carry a different signature. The Titan had rewritten stellar physics across a distance that took light itself 14 years to cross, and it had done it in 47 seconds. Zithrek stood at the railing. He did not speak. He did not move. His ceremonial plate caught the fading light from the forward array, and the rank clasps on his shoulders clicked once, very softly, as he shifted his weight and then stopped shifting. Velkoreth looked at Vas. The Admiral was still standing at the center of the floor, his hands at his sides, his leather jacket scuffed at the elbows, and he was not smiling. He was not triumphant. He looked tired, the way a man looks when he has finally shown someone something he never wanted to have to show. "The vote," someone said. "It might have been a Saurolith delegate, it might have been the air itself. The vote is." There was no vote. The fleet was rotating. One by one, the 43 capital ships turned and withdrew, their running lights blinking in patterns that meant something different now. The 120 support vessels followed. No command had been given. No order had been issued. 890,000 crews simply left, the way men leave a room when they have seen something that has rewritten the rules of the room. Elder Maveth stood from the Saurolith tier. She was 1,200 years old, and she had seen 3 species ascend and 2 fall, and she had not spoken in 400 years. Her voice was the sound of dust settling on stone. "The Quiet Forge," she said. "That was what they called it in the old records, a program name. I thought it was a myth." Velkoreth gripped his stone. It was hot now, hot enough to leave a mark on his palm, and he did not let go. He watched Zithrek's face for 12 minutes. He watched the certainty drain out of it, not into fear. Fear would have been easier. It drained into something worse. The realization that a species you had classified, filed, and dismissed had been building something in silence that redefined the category you had placed them in. Vas walked to the table where he had left his teapot. He picked it up. He ran his thumb over the chip on the handle, and for a moment he was just a man in a leather jacket with a chipped teapot, and then he was something else, and then he was both, and the chamber could not hold both ideas at once. "The interdiction," Zithrek said, his voice was flat, "is withdrawn." No one seconded. No one objected. The motion passed without a vote, the way gravity passes without a vote. 6 hours later, Velkoreth sat in his quarters and wrote his testimony for the 3rd time. He had written it twice before, deleted it twice. The words would not hold what he had seen. The stone lay on his desk, cooling now, and he thought of Voss's teapot, 12 years old, manufactured on Earth, carried across the stars to a diplomatic waiting room where a man had waited with his thumb on a chip. He thought of the jacket, 34 years of service, scuffed at the elbows. He thought of the hull, 312 degrees, warm as living skin, waiting in the void for longer than either of those numbers. The pot was never just a pot. The jacket was never just a jacket. They were fingerprints. They were signatures of a species that had learned to build in silence, to wait in warmth, to speak only when the speaking would reframe everything that had been said before. A knock at the door. Curacao, she did not enter. She stood in the corridor, her large dark eyes catching the station light, and she asked the question that Velkoreth had been trying to answer with his testimony. They didn't need to show us that, she said. They didn't need to show us anything. Why did they? Velkoreth looked at the stone on his desk. He looked at the words he had written and deleted. He looked at the empty space where the testimony should be, and he understood that the answer was not in the words. The answer was in the silence that followed the words. Because they were not showing us what they could do, he said. They were showing us what they had already done, while we were not watching. He set down his stylus. He did not file the testimony. He left it on the desk, the words facing up, and he walked to the window and looked out at the stars between the Cathari belt, and he waited for the light that would arrive in 14 years, the light that would carry a different signature, the light that would tell the galaxy that humanity had spoken, and that the speaking had not been with words. The teapot sat on Voss's desk aboard the Titan, 12 kilometers of dark hull and warm skin, and the chip on its handle caught the light from a star that had been rewritten. And the man who had carried it ran his thumb over the chip one more time, and then he poured tea for two, though no one else was there, and the steam rose in the recycled air, and the ship waited, breathing, warm, alive. Curacao did not leave the corridor. She stood with her hands folded in the way her people did when they were waiting for an answer they knew would not satisfy them. "You didn't answer," she said. Velkoreth turned from the window. The twin star light made his bronze skin look like metal that had been hammered too thin. "I answered," he said. "You heard the words. You are asking for different words." "What did they build it for?" Curacao asked. "Not the demonstration, the ship itself, the quiet forge, what was it for?" Velkoreth looked at the stone on his desk. It had cooled to room temperature, but the mark it had left on his palm was still there, a pale circle that would fade by morning. "I don't know," he said. "That is the truth I have been trying to write. I don't know what it was for. I only know what it did." Curacao stepped into the room. Protocol said she should not. She stepped in anyway. "The fleet withdrew," she said, "but the Titan did not leave. It is still holding position, 312 degrees, warm. The escort frigates are still in formation. They are not moving. They are not communicating. They are just waiting." "Waiting for what?" "That is what I came to ask you," Curacao said. "You were in the chamber. You saw Voss's face. Was this the end of something or the beginning?" Velkoreth sat down. He did not touch the testimony. He looked at the empty space where the words should be. "Both," he said. "That is the problem with questions that matter. They are always both." 3 days later, the council met in emergency session. Not the full chamber. The full chamber had not met since the demonstration. 4,000 delegates had scattered to their ships, their stations, their worlds, carrying stories that grew louder with each retelling. The emergency session was smaller. 19 delegates from the species that had voted against interdiction, plus 3 observers, plus Velkoreth, who had not been invited but had come anyway. Zthrek was not there. The Vorkai delegation had sent a junior attaché, a young officer with scales that had not yet darkened to the full ceremonial hue. He sat at the back and said nothing. The session was about the spectrograph. Kurasal had the data. She spread it across the central table, the way a cook spreads ingredients before a meal, and she named each one. The star is G-type, she said. Main sequence. Unremarkable. No planets in the habitable zone. No colonies. No mining claims. The Council has never named it because no one has ever needed to name it. It was catalogued 2,000 years ago as a navigation reference and forgotten. She paused. She looked at Velkoreth and he nodded. After the beam, she said, the spectrograph shifted, not destroyed, not dimmed. The hydrogen absorption lines have changed. The helium ratio has changed. The star is still burning, but it is burning differently. It is burning the way a star burns after someone has reached inside and adjusted the fuel. A Saurolith delegate named Thesson raised one hand. He was 800 years old, young by Saurolith standards, and his voice was the sound of water moving through deep caves. Adjusted it for what purpose? I don't know, Kurasal said. That is what I am trying to find out. The shift is small. It would not affect any planet in the system. It would not affect any ship passing through. It is a change that changes nothing, except the record. Velkoreth felt the stone in his pocket. He had not carried it in 3 days. He had not needed to. What record? He asked. The record of what the star was, Kurasal said, before and what it is now. The difference is the message. The star is the message. The beam was the pen. The room went quiet. Not the silence of the chamber, the great 12,000-year silence that had fallen when the beam opened. A smaller silence. A silence that happens in small rooms when someone says something that cannot be unsaid. Then the target was not the star, Velkoreth said. No, Kurasal said, the target was us. The star was just paper. That night, Velkoreth went to the observation gallery. It was empty. The 12 junior officers from 7 species had been reassigned, scattered to ships and stations, carrying reports that would be read by people who had not been there. The transparent walls were still transparent. The floor was still cold. The twin stars of the Kethari belt still pulsed their light through the glass. He stood at the station where Kurasal had run her signature analysis. The screen was dark. He touched it and it woke, and it showed him the Titan. It was still there. 12 kilometers of dark hull, 312 degrees of warmth, holding position in the neutral zone where the interdiction fleet had been. The escort frigates surrounded it in a loose sphere, 7 ships that had not moved in 3 days. The Borealis was closest, its running lights blinking in a pattern that meant stand by, stand by, stand by. Petty Officer Sam Okonkwo was still aboard the Borealis. Velkoreth knew this because he had checked the roster. He did not know why he had checked the roster. He did not know why he cared about a man who hummed his grandmother's song and ate honey from a tin. He looked at the Titan. He looked at the empty space where the beam had been. He thought of the star, 14 light-years away, burning differently now, carrying a message that would arrive in 14 years, a message that said, "We were here. We saw you. We changed something you thought was unchangeable, and we did it while you were watching." The screen flickered. Velkoreth leaned closer. The flicker was not in the screen, it was in the image. The Titan's hull was shifting, not moving, shifting. The dark surface seemed to ripple the way water ripples when something moves beneath it, and then a section opened. Not the forward array, something smaller, a port, a door. A ship emerged. It was tiny against the Titan's bulk, no larger than one of the escort frigates, but it moved differently. It did not use engines. It did not fold space. It simply moved, the way a fish moves in water, the way a hand moves when it knows where it is going. It headed toward Council Station. Velkoreth gripped the edge of the console. The stone in his pocket was warm again. The ship docked at Bay 7, the same bay where Voss had arrived 6 days earlier with his teapot and his leather jacket. Velkoreth was there. He had not been invited. He had come anyway, the way he had come to the emergency session, the way he had come to the gallery, the way he had come to every place where something was happening that he did not understand. Kurasal was there too. She had her data slate in her hand, and her large dark eyes were fixed on the docking port, and she did not blink. The door opened. A woman stepped out. She was human, short by galactic standards, with gray hair pulled back in a way that suggested practicality rather than style. She wore a uniform that had no rank insignia, no medals, no marks of distinction. She carried nothing in her hands. She looked at Velkorath. She looked at Kurasal. She looked at the two security officers who had been ordered to stand by and who were now standing very still. "I am Dr. Yuki Tanaka," she said. Her voice was soft, the voice of someone who had spent many years speaking to people who did not want to hear what she had to say. "I am the chief engineer of the Quiet Forge. I have come to answer questions, if anyone has questions." The security officers did not move. Kurasal did not speak. Velkorath felt the stone in his pocket, hot now, burning against his thigh, and he stepped forward. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you come?" Dr. Tanaka smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed an answer to a question that was not the right question. "Because the question is not why we built it," she said. "The question is why we kept it secret, and the answer to that is, because we were asked to." "Asked by whom?" "By you," Dr. Tanaka said. She looked at Velkorath, and her eyes were the color of earth steel, the color of the teapot's chip, the color of something that had been broken and kept anyway. "By all of you. The council asked humanity to be quiet, to file paperwork, to pay dues, to never raise our voices, so we were quiet, we filed. We paid, and while we were quiet we built." She stepped past him. She walked toward the corridor that led to the main chamber, and her footsteps were soft, the way Voss's footsteps had been soft, the way the Titan's beam had been soft, and Velkorath understood that he was not watching a confession. He was watching a receipt. "The council will want to speak with you," Kurasal said. Her voice was not steady. "The council has been speaking with us for 300 years, Dr. Tanaka said. "We are here now to listen." She stopped at the corridor's end. She did not turn around. "Admiral Voss will arrive in 14 minutes, she said. "He has one more thing to show you, something that was not in the demonstration, something that was not in the beam. Something that has been waiting longer than the Titan itself." She walked through the door, and it closed behind her, and the stone in Velkorath's pocket was so hot that he had to take it out and hold it in his palm, and he looked at it, and he saw that it had cracked, a thin line running through the bronze surface, the way a heart cracks when it understands something it did not want to understand. Kurasal looked at the crack. She looked at Velkorath. "What has been waiting longer than the Titan?" she asked. Velkorath closed his hand around the stone. The crack was sharp against his skin. "I don't know," he said, "but I think we are about to find out why the warm hull was not the most frightening thing." The corridor was empty. Dr. Tanaka had walked through the door, and the door had closed, and Velkorath stood with a cracked stone in his palm, and a question that had no shape. 14 minutes, Kurasal said. She was looking at her data slate, but the screen was dark. She said 14 minutes. That is the same warning Voss gave. "Not a warning," Velkorath said. "A habit, a measurement. They think in 14-minute increments the way we think in cycles." He put the stone in his pocket. The crack was sharp against his thigh. He walked toward the door, and Kurasal followed, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say that would not sound like fear. The main chamber was half full, not the 4,000 delegates of the full council, but enough. The 19 species that had voted against interdiction. The 3 observers. The junior Vorkai attaché still at the back, still saying nothing. And now Dr. Yuki Tanaka, standing at the center of the floor where Voss had stood, where the beam had been discussed, where the silence had fallen. Velkorath took his place at the Torvani tier. The stone in his pocket pressed against him, a small weight that felt larger than it was. Dr. Tanaka looked up at the tears. She did not smile. She did not frown. She had the face of someone who had spent years explaining things to people who were not ready to understand them. "The Titan," she said, "is not a weapon. I want to be clear about that before Admiral Voss arrives. It is not a warship. It is not a deterrent. It is a tool. A very large tool built for a very specific job, and the job is not what you think." A Saurolith delegate named Thesson raised his hand. "What is the job?" "To keep a promise," Dr. Tanaka said. "Humanity made a promise 300 years ago when we joined the Council. We were told to be quiet. We were told to file paperwork. We were told to pay dues and never raise our voices. And we agreed. But we added one condition. A condition that was not written in any charter. A condition that was spoken in a room very much like this one, by a human diplomat whose name is not in your records because we asked that it not be." She paused. She looked at Vel'Korath, and for a moment he thought she was looking at the stone in his pocket, though she could not see it. "The condition was this," Dr. Tanaka said. "If the Council ever threatened humanity with extinction, if the Council ever voted to erase us, if the Council ever decided that our quietness was weakness and our weakness was grounds for removal, then we would show you what quietness had built, not to destroy you, to remind you that you asked for it." The chamber was silent. Not the great silence of the beam, but a smaller silence, the silence of people hearing something they had not expected to hear. "And the star?" Kurasal asked. She had not been given permission to speak, but she spoke anyway. "The star you altered, the message you wrote in its spectrum, what was that?" "That," Dr. Tanaka said, "was the receipt, the proof that we could. The question is not what we showed you. The question is what we did not show you. What has been waiting longer than the Titan? What Admiral Voss will bring in?" She looked at a small device on her wrist. 7 minutes. Vel'Korath gripped the stone. The crack was widening. He could feel it growing, a thin line becoming a fissure, and something inside the stone was pressing against the break, something that wanted out. Voss arrived in 6 minutes, not 7. He walked through the door in his leather jacket, the scuffed elbows catching the light from the central display. He carried a case, not a weapon case, not a data case, a small metal box the size of a briefcase with a handle that had been worn smooth by years of carrying. He did not look at Dr. Tanaka. He did not look at the tears. He walked to the center of the floor and set the case down, and he opened it. Inside was a book. Not a data slate, not a screen. A book. Paper pages bound in a cover that had been repaired with tape, the kind of tape that humans used for temporary fixes that became permanent because no one ever got around to replacing them. Voss lifted the book. He opened it to a page near the middle, and he read aloud. "Entry 1, he said. Year 1 of the Quiet Forge. The Council has asked us to be silent. We have agreed, but silence is not emptiness. Silence is space, and space is where you build what no one sees." He turned the page. Entry 47, Year 12. The Vorkai have taken 6 worlds. The Council has not intervened. We have not objected. We have filed the paperwork. We have paid the dues. And we have added one more layer to the hull. Another page. Entry 203, Year 89. The Saurolith Elder has spoken of 3 species that ascended. We have listened. We have not asked what ascension means. We have added one more layer to the hull. He looked up. He looked at Vel'Korath. Entry 312, Voss said. Year 312. The Torvani ambassador has carried a stone for 94 cycles. We have watched him carry it. We have not asked why. We have added one more layer to the hull. Vel'Korath felt the stone in his pocket. The crack was wide now. Something was inside it, something that had been inside it for longer than he had carried it, and he understood that he had not chosen the stone. The stone had been chosen for him. Voss closed the book. He looked at the case, and for a moment he seemed to be looking at something that was not there, something that had been in the case before the book, something that the book had replaced. The Titan, he said, was built in 312 years, one layer per year, one entry per layer, but the book is not the oldest thing in the case. The book is the newest. The oldest thing is what I will show you now. What has been waiting longer than the Titan, longer than the quiet forge, longer than the council itself. He reached into the case. He lifted out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it. It was a stone. Not a Torvani stone, not the stone in Velkoreth's pocket, a different stone, a stone that had been shaped by hands, not by nature. It had been carved into a flat disc, and on the disc was a symbol that Velkoreth did not recognize. A circle, a line through the circle, and words written in a language that was older than the council, older than the Torvani, older than any species in the chamber. "What is it?" Kurasal asked. Her voice was barely audible. "It is a message," Voss said. "Not from humanity to humanity. It was found 312 years ago, before the Quiet Forge began, before the council asked us to be quiet. It was found in a place that should not exist. A place between stars where no ship had ever been. A place that was warm." He looked at Velkoreth. 312 degrees, Voss said. Body temperature, the same as the Titan's hull, the same as the stone you are carrying. The same as the stone that cracked when the beam fired, because the beam was not aimed at a star. The beam was aimed at the stones, at all the stones, at every stone that has been carried by every Torvani ambassador for 94 cycles. The beam was a key, and the stones were locks. Velkoreth took the stone from his pocket. The crack had split it in two. Inside, where the bronze surface had been, there was a small cavity, and in the cavity there was a light, not bright, not warm, a small steady light that pulsed in a rhythm that matched the twin stars of the Cathari belt, that matched the heartbeat of the Titan's hull, that matched something older than both. "The Torvani," Voss said, "were not the first diplomats. The Torvani were the inheritors. The stone you carry was given to your people by the ones who came before, the ones who built the first quiet forge, the ones who asked the first species to be silent. And when that species was silent, they built. And when they built, they left. And they left the stones behind to wait for the next species that would understand what silence could build." He held up the carved disc. "This is their message," he said. "It says, we were here. We built in silence, we left, and we will return when the galaxy is ready, when the galaxy has learned that power is not in the noise you make but in the space you leave for others to grow." The chamber was silent, the great silence, the 12,000-year silence. Velkoreth looked at the stone in his hand, at the light inside it, and he understood that he had been carrying a message for 94 cycles, and he had never known it. "Why now?" he asked. "Why did you unlock it now?" Voss looked at him. The leather jacket was scuffed at the elbows. The teapot was not here, but Velkoreth could see it, could see the chip on the handle, could see the thumb running over it. "Because," Voss said, "the council voted 341 to 19, because the fleet was going to deploy in 72 hours, because the interdiction was not a threat, it was a test. And we had to know if the galaxy was ready, if the galaxy had learned, if the galaxy could see silence as strength or only as weakness." He paused. "The beam was not a demonstration of power," he said. "It was a question. And the question was, do you understand yet?" Velkoreth looked at the light in the stone. It pulsed. It waited. It had been waiting for longer than the Titan, longer than the Quiet Forge, longer than the council, and now it was awake, and it was asking something that had no words, only rhythm, only light, only the warmth of a hull that had been kept alive in the void. "I don't know," Velkoreth said. "I don't know if we understand. I don't know if we are ready." Voss nodded. He wrapped the disc back in its cloth. He put it in the case. He closed the case, and the click of the latch was the only sound in the chamber. "Then we will wait," he said. "We have waited 312 years. We can wait longer. The Titan will hold position. The hull will stay warm. And the light in your stone will stay on until you know the answer, or until you don't need to ask anymore." He picked up the case. He walked toward the door. Dr. Tanaka followed him, and the door opened, and they walked through, and the door closed, and the chamber was left with the silence that had been there before, but it was a different silence now. It was a silence that had weight. It was a silence that had history. It was a silence that was waiting for an answer. Vel-Korath stood with the stone in his hand, the two halves fitting together around the light, and he looked at Kurasal and she looked at him, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that would not sound like a beginning. The light in the stone pulsed. Vel-Korath held the two halves together, and the pulse matched the rhythm of the twin stars, and the rhythm of the Titan's hull, and something older than both, and he understood that the waiting was not over. The waiting had only changed its shape. Kurasal touched her data slate. The screen was still dark, but her fingers moved across it the way a musician touches an instrument she has played so long she no longer needs to see the keys. "The escort frigates are moving," she said. "The Borealis is breaking formation. Petty Officer Okonkwo's ship is heading toward the Titan." Vel-Korath looked at her, heading toward or being pulled. She did not answer. She did not need to. They both knew that the difference between heading and being pulled was a question of intent, and intent was something you could not read from a data slate. The Borealis docked with the Titan at a port that had not existed until the frigate approached. The port opened the way a flower opens, the way a mouth opens to speak, and Sam Okonkwo stood at the airlock with his tin of honey in his pocket and his grandmother's song in his throat, and he did not hum. He did not speak. He stepped through the door, and the door closed behind him, and the warmth of the hull wrapped around him like a blanket. The corridor was not metal. It was something else, something that felt like bone and breathed like skin, and the temperature was 312 degrees, body temperature, the temperature of living things, and Sam Okonkwo walked down the corridor with his hands at his sides, the way Admiral Voss had walked, the way men walk when they have already made every decision they need to make. He reached a chamber. The chamber was round and the walls were transparent, and he could see the stars through them, the twin stars of the Cathari belt, the distant star that had been rewritten, the other stars that had not been touched yet. And in the center of the chamber there was a table. On the table there was a teapot. Not the teapot, a teapot, small, ceramic with a chip on the handle. Sam Okonkwo walked to the table. He picked up the teapot. He ran his thumb over the chip, and the chip was warm, and the warmth was the same as the hull, the same as the stone, the same as the light that pulsed in Vel-Korath's palm on Council Station, 14 light-years away, or 14 minutes away, or no distance at all. A voice spoke, not from the walls, not from the air, from the teapot, from the chip, from the warmth itself. "You are not the first," the voice said. "You are the next. The Torvani carried the stones. The humans built the Titan. And you, Sam Okonkwo, will carry the honey." Sam Okonkwo did not ask what the voice meant. He had stopped asking questions the moment he stepped through the airlock. He opened his tin. He took a spoonful of honey. He set the tin on the table next to the teapot, and the honey and the ceramic touched, and the warmth grew brighter, and the stars outside the transparent walls seemed to shift, the way the spectrum had shifted, the way everything shifted when the quiet finally spoke. Zithrek found Vel-Korath on the observation deck. The Vorkai commander had not spoken in 12 minutes or 12 hours or 12 days. Time had become uncertain since the beam. His scales had dulled from their ceremonial shine. His knuckles were still white, but now they were white from gripping the railing of the deck, not from certainty, but from the effort of standing. "You knew," Zithrek said. His voice was not the voice of conquest, It was the voice of a man who had lost something he could not name. You knew, the stone. You carried it for 94 cycles. You knew what it was. Vel-Korath looked at the stone in his hand. The light pulsed. The two halves fit together and the crack was no longer a break. It was a seam. It was a door. I knew it was warm, Vel-Korath said. I knew it was old. I knew it was from my homeworld, and I knew that my homeworld was older than the Council, and I knew that the Council was older than the Vorkai campaigns. But I did not know what it was waiting for. I did not know that warmth was a message. I thought warmth was just warmth. Zthrek gripped the railing tighter. The fleet is gone. The interdiction is withdrawn. The vote is. There is no vote. The Council has not met in 12 days. The delegates have scattered. The 4,000 have become 4,000 individuals, each carrying their own stone, their own warmth, their own question. And you, Vel-Korath asked, what do you carry? Zthrek looked at his hands. The scales were dull. The ceremonial plate was cracked at the shoulder, a small break that had happened when he gripped the railing too hard, or when the beam fired, or when the silence fell. He did not know when. I carry 6 worlds, he said. 6 worlds I took, 6 campaigns I won, and I thought that was power. I thought that was what the galaxy measured, but the galaxy does not measure. The galaxy waits, and the waiting is the power. He looked at the stone in Vel-Korath's hand. What happens now? He asked. Vel-Korath closed his fingers around the stone. The light pulsed against his palm, a rhythm that was not his heartbeat, not the twin stars, not the Titan's hull, but all of them together, a rhythm that had been waiting for longer than any of them. Now, he said, we wait for the light to arrive, we wait for the star's new spectrum to reach us, we wait for the galaxy to understand what it has seen, and while we wait, we build, in silence, in warmth, in the space we leave for others. He turned from the railing. He walked toward the door, and Zthrek did not follow, and the observation deck was empty except for the Vorkai commander and the stars and the silence that had been there for 12,000 years, but was now a different silence. A silence that hummed, a silence that pulsed, a silence that was waiting for the next voice, the next builder, the next species that would learn to build in the dark. Kurasal sat in the gallery, alone. The 12 stations were empty. The 7 species had gone. The transparent walls showed the stars, and the stars showed the Titan, and the Titan showed nothing, only its dark hull and its warm skin and its waiting. She had the spectrograph on her screen, the star's new signature, the message that had been written in light. She had read it 1,000 times and she still did not understand it, but she understood that understanding was not the point. The point was the reading. The point was the carrying. The point was the waiting. Her data slate chimed. A message from the Borealis, from Sam Okonkwo. A single line, no encryption, no code. The honey is sweet, it said. The teapot is warm. The waiting is over. The waiting has just begun. She did not reply. She set the slate down. She looked at the stars and she thought of the stone in Vel-Korath's hand and the teapot on the Titan's table and the honey in Sam Okonkwo's tin, and she understood that they were all the same thing. They were all messages. They were all locks waiting for keys. They were all warmth in the void, keeping something alive that had been alive for longer than the Council, longer than the galaxy, longer than the silence itself. She stood, she walked to the transparent wall. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, and she felt the warmth from the Titan, 312 degrees body temperature, the temperature of living things, and she knew that the void had given back heat, and the heat was a question, and the question was, are you ready? She did not answer. She pressed her palm harder against the glass, and the glass was cold, and her palm was warm, and the warmth spread into the cold, the way the beam had spread into the star, the way the silence had spread into the chamber, the way everything spread when it was finally time to stop waiting and start building. The light from the twin stars pulsed through the glass. The Titan's hull shimmered in the distance. And somewhere, 14 light-years away, a star burned with a new signature, a new message, a new question that would take 14 years to arrive. And when it arrived, it would find a galaxy that had learned to wait or a galaxy that had not. And the waiting would continue either way, because the waiting was the point. The waiting was the power. The waiting was the forge that shaped everything that mattered. Kurasal took her hand from the glass. She walked to the door. She did not look back. The teapot sat on the Titan's table, warm, chipped, waiting. The stone pulsed in Vel-Korath's pocket, two halves of a hole, a lock that had become a key. The honey waited in Sam Okonkwo's tin, sweet, patient, alive. And the galaxy turned and the stars burned, and the silence hummed with a rhythm that was older than words, older than war, older than the quiet that had built the forge and the forge that had built the quiet. And the waiting continued because the waiting was everything, and everything was the waiting, and the void gave back heat, and the heat was a beginning.